You wake up and the day is already there, waiting. There are things to do, emails to answer, tasks that have been sitting in a list for weeks, people expecting responses. And you know all of this. You see it clearly, but something that used to push you toward action has gone quiet. The alarm goes off and you get up. You go through the motions, shower, coffee, the small rituals that structure a morning. Everything functions, the machinery of daily life continues to operate, but underneath, there's a strange stillness, a missing pulse. You remember when things felt urgent, when a deadline created pressure you could feel in your chest, when an unanswered message sat in your mind until you dealt with it, when the gap between what needed to be done and what you had done produced a kind of friction that moved you forward. That friction has faded. The deadlines still exist. The messages still arrive. The gap between done and undone is still there, but the internal response has changed. Where there used to be pressure, there's something closer to indifference. Where there used to be momentum, there's a kind of waiting. You're waiting for something to feel important enough to move toward, and the feeling doesn't come. This shows up in small ways at first. You delay responding to things that would have taken 30 seconds. You let opportunities pass that would have interested you a year ago. You notice yourself saying, "I'll do it later," about things that don't actually require later. They could be done now. But now doesn't feel any different from later. And later doesn't feel any different from never. The people around you might not notice. You're still showing up, still meeting the minimum requirements, still doing enough to avoid concern. But you know something has shifted. The engine that used to run without thinking now requires constant manual effort, and the effort is getting harder to summon. Some activities felt meaningful. Some relationships felt important. Some goals felt worth pursuing. The world had texture, a natural hierarchy where some things mattered more than others. You didn't have to think about it. You just felt it. That hierarchy has flattened. You look at things that used to hold weight, and they feel equivalent to things that never did. The work project that once felt significant now feels the same as the administrative task you've been avoiding. The friendship that once felt central now occupies the same space as acquaintances you barely remember. The ambitions that once drove you now sit alongside idle thoughts, indistinguishable in their pull. This flattening changes how decisions feel. When everything has the same weight, choosing becomes arbitrary. You pick things because they're in front of you, because someone asked, because the path of least resistance led there. The sense of moving toward something has been replaced by a sense of just moving. Direction without destination. You try to remember what used to create the hierarchy, what made some things feel important and others feel ignorable, and you realize you don't know. It was never something you understood, it just operated. A signal that ran in the background, sorting the world into what mattered and what didn't. Now the signal has gone weak. The sorting has stopped. Everything arrives with equal claim on your attention, which means nothing has any claim at all. People talk about their passions, and you listen, trying to locate something similar in yourself. They describe what drives them, what excites them, what they're building toward. And you recognize the words, but the feeling underneath them seems foreign, like a language you used to speak but have started to forget. The flatness extends into the future. When you think about next month, next year, the life you're supposedly building, it all has the same quality. A vague grayness where nothing stands out. Planning feels pointless because nothing you're planning toward feels more valuable than what you have now. And what you have now doesn't feel valuable either. It just is. Looking back, you can see how this developed. It didn't arrive suddenly. It accumulated. For years, you adapted. You adjusted to jobs that required you to care about things you didn't care about. You maintained relationships that asked you to show up in ways that didn't match how you felt. You pursued goals that belonged to some earlier version of yourself, or maybe never belonged to you at all. Each adaptation was small. Each compromise seemed reasonable. You told yourself, this is what adults do. This is how the world works. You fit yourself into the shapes that were required, and the shapes kept changing, and you kept fitting. But adaptation has a cost. Every time you pretend something matters when it doesn't, you spend something. Every time you perform interest you don't feel, you use a resource that doesn't automatically replenish. Every time you adjust yourself to meet an external demand, you move a little further from whatever signal was supposed to guide you from the inside. Do this long enough and the signal weakens. The part of you that knew what you actually wanted, what actually mattered to you specifically, that part gets quieter with each compromise. Eventually it goes silent. And when it goes silent, the world flattens. Because without an internal guide, everything external looks the same. Important and unimportant become indistinguishable when there's no internal reference to sort them by. This is the hidden cost of being too good at adapting. You can become so skilled at meeting expectations that you lose contact with your own. You can become so fluent in performing engagement that you forget what genuine engagement feels like. You can build a life that makes sense to everyone except the person living it. The exhaustion that comes with this is specific. It shows up as fatigue that sleep doesn't fix. It shows up as weight in ordinary tasks that should feel light. It shows up as a strange distance from your own life, like watching yourself from a few feet away, going through motions that someone else designed. This exhaustion is the cost finally coming due. All those adaptations, all those compromises, all that energy spent pretending things mattered that didn't. The bill arrives gradually, and the payment is the very capacity to care. The strange thing about this state is its invisibility. From the outside, nothing looks wrong. You still function. You still show up at work, still maintain your relationships, still respond to messages within a reasonable time. You still smile when you're supposed to smile, still ask the questions you're supposed to ask, still perform the small rituals that signal normal engagement. The outside remains intact. This is partly because you've learned to perform. Years of adaptation have made you fluent in the language of caring. You know what engaged looks like. You know what interested sounds like. You can produce these presentations automatically, without the internal state they're supposed to represent. The performance has become detached from the feeling. But it's also because people see what they expect to see. Your friends expect you to be you. Your family expects you to show up the way you always have. Your colleagues expect you to do your job. And you do. You meet the expectations. You give people no reason to look closer. Occasionally, someone asks if you're okay, and you say yes. Because how would you explain this? How would you describe a flatness that doesn't hurt, that doesn't panic, that doesn't present as any recognizable problem? You don't have the vocabulary for this experience. It doesn't fit the categories that people use to understand distress. When the sense of importance fades, what's left is surprisingly functional. You can still make decisions, they just feel arbitrary. You pick options because something has to be picked, and these options are as good as any others. The absence of strong preference speeds certain things up. You don't agonize, you don't overthink. You just choose, knowing the choice doesn't matter much, and move on. You can still work. In some ways, work gets easier. The emotional noise that used to accompany tasks is gone. You do what's required without the internal commentary about whether it's meaningful or fulfilling. The questions that used to distract you, is this what I should be doing? Does this matter? Am I wasting my life? They've gone quiet. And in the quiet, there's a certain efficiency. You can still connect with people. The connections just feel different, lighter, less loaded. You show up, you're pleasant. You even enjoy moments of genuine warmth. But the deep investment, the sense that these relationships are central to your existence, that feeling has receded. People pass through your life and you appreciate them, and there's less grip. There's something almost peaceful about this. The constant striving that used to characterize your days has calmed. The anxiety about whether you're doing enough, being enough, achieving enough, it's faded with the importance it was attached to. You're still here, still functioning, but you're no longer running. The question is whether this peace is real or whether it's a kind of numbness wearing the mask of peace. And you don't know. You can't tell from the inside. It feels calm. It feels sustainable. It feels like you could continue this way indefinitely. But there's a part of you that remembers what engagement felt like, what caring felt like, and wonders if this sustainable calm is actually a form of loss so gradual you didn't notice it happening. The things that remain are simple. Physical sensations still land. The warmth of sunlight, the taste of food, the relief of lying down at the end of the day. Small pleasures that don't require importance to be felt. They're still available, still real. They just exist in a landscape where nothing rises much higher than anything else. What becomes clear, slowly, is that much of what used to feel important was manufactured. The urgency of career achievements, the weight of social status, the pressure to be building something, becoming something, proving something, these felt natural. They felt like they came from inside. But looking back, it's hard to separate them from external noise, from expectations absorbed so early they felt like instincts, from a culture that treats ambition as virtue and contentment as failure. When that noise fades, you're left with a quieter question. What, if anything, actually matters to you? What would matter if no one was watching? What would you move toward if there was nothing to prove and no one to impress? These questions don't come with easy answers. The machinery that used to generate answers has shut down. You're left without the false confidence that used to tell you what to want. And in that absence, there's a kind of blankness, a waiting. Some people describe this as depression. The clinical language offers a frame that makes the experience legible, but the frame doesn't quite fit. This feels less like an illness and more like an aftermath, like the quiet that follows when a loud machine finally stops running. The machine was dysfunctional. Its stopping is, in some sense, progress. But the silence it leaves behind is disorienting. You start to understand that you might have been living according to signals that were never really yours, importance that was assigned rather than felt, urgency that was constructed rather than genuine. And the flatness you're experiencing now might be what happens when those artificial signals finally stop transmitting. This understanding doesn't resolve anything. It doesn't bring the feeling back. It doesn't tell you what comes next. It just offers a different way of seeing what you're in, a way that doesn't require you to be broken, a way that allows this state to be a transition rather than a destination. Whether it actually is a transition remains to be seen. The flatness might lift. Something might eventually emerge from the silence, some genuine signal that belongs to you specifically, that rises without being manufactured. Or the flatness might persist, might become the new normal, a life without artificial importance, which also means a life without much importance at all. You can't know yet. You're still in it, still waiting to see what happens when the waiting ends, still standing in the space that's left when urgency leaves and nothing has arrived to take its place. The one thing you know for certain is that going back is impossible. The old signals won't work anymore. You've seen through them. You felt their absence and discovered you could survive it. Whatever comes next will have to be built from something different, from something quieter, from something that doesn't require the volume to be turned up to be heard. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the flatness is the beginning of learning to hear at a different frequency. Or maybe it's just flatness. The only way to know is to keep living and see what emerges. Nothing feels important anymore. That's the truth of where you are. And the strange thing is, that truth itself doesn't feel important either. It's just a fact, a description of the current landscape, a weather report from inside a life that's still being lived, one quiet day at a time.